The Boys Episode 5 is another hour filled with Easter eggs, hidden references in the background, and callbacks to the comics, as well as some hilarious cameos. So instead of sitting here and just hammering out an intro for you guys that you're probably going to skip over, let's instead take a look at all the things that you might have missed. And yes, there will be spoilers for the episode in this video. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it.
God, okay, so why don't you go and do that?
Before he was cast as Soldier Boy in The Boys, Jensen Ackles played the role of Dean Winchester in a little show called Supernatural. You may not have heard of it, it only ran for like 15 seasons or something like that.
You don't say.
Ackles is probably best known for his Supernatural days, so it's unsurprising that The Boys insert a little Easter egg back to that classic show. As Soldier Boy walks through the streets of Manhattan, acclimating to his life in the US in the 21st century, he sees multiple images of the new soups in town, including Homelander and Queen Maeve. Most importantly, however, he sees numerous election posters for presidential candidate and current Secretary of Defense Robert Singer plastered on walls and lampposts. Robert Singer's actor, Jim Beaver, also appeared in Supernatural as the character Bobby Singer, or if you were to use his full name, Robert Singer. To be fair, he does look much more like a Robert Singer than a Jim Beaver, whatever that means.
Hey, ass butt.
Ass butt?
Speaking of Soldier Boy, it became clear that he paid a visit to MM's contact and former Vought employee, Legend, in order to pick up his old super suit.
No, it's not a name, it's a level.
Legend is very much stuck in the past, something expressed with all the pictures and posters on his walls, but more on that later. Now, Legend is a new character to the show, but he's a famous one from the comics, albeit a rather controversial one. That's because he's a parody of Marvel legend Stan Lee. In the comics, Legend, or Old Legend as he is known, is an elderly comic book store owner with an insatiable appetite. And no, I'm not referring to food. Who has an expansive knowledge on basically every soup on the planet. Legend had yet to appear on the show as the character was deemed too disrespectful to Lee, and there are actors who had gone so far as to label the role as career suicide. Given that Lee sadly passed away in 2018, 1 year before The Boys premiered, making a joke at his expense would have been seen as going too far, even by The Boys standards. That's why the show seemingly did away with the Lee parody, instead turning the character into a caricature of his sleazy 70s Hollywood producers. But they did at least fit in with some Stan Lee style glasses. Continuing on with Legend, in his apartment we see many posters and paraphernalia for an era long since gone, with him having pictures of himself taken with Burt Reynolds and Carrie Fisher on the walls of his apartment, as well as posters to fake movies. But also in the background there is a picture that is potentially much more concerning. At roughly around the 34 minutes and 53 second mark, a black and white sketch of a man with glasses can be seen in the background. Now, while it isn't a dead ringer, it does look a lot like the infamous sketch of the Zodiac killer who plagued Northern California in the 1960s. Could this be suggesting that Legend is the Zodiac killer, or at least knows him? Might be a stretch, but it's worth mentioning. Speaking of stretches though, could the Marlon Brando reference be a joke at the bizarre internet theory about Homeland actor Anthony Starr? There are some on Reddit who believe that Starr has cotton in his mouth to expand his jaw, something which Brando did for his role as Don Corleone in The Godfather. It's a stretch, I know, but in this day and age and in this business, you have to assume everything is an Easter egg, to a certain point. As we have mentioned, there are some parallels that can be drawn between Soldier Boy and Winter Soldier, other than the fact that they both have Soldier in their name, as both were kidnapped and subjected to a series of tests that turned them into secret weapons. They also seemingly have trigger words that set their powers into motion. During episode 5, as Soldier Boy walks through Manhattan, he hears a Russian song from a radio which triggers him to cause an explosion that kills 19 people. This is similar to the string of trigger words such as longing, rusted, 17, daybreak, that turns Bucky back into his Winter Soldier alter ego. Speaking of Soldier Boy exploding though, could this all be foreshadowing a potential showdown with Homelander and a possible means of defeating him? After the explosion in Manhattan, Butcher used a Geiger counter which picks up radiation from the explosion site. Later on, as Soldier Boy approaches the home of his old flame Crimson Countess, Butcher uses the Geiger counter again to anticipate Soldier Boy's arrival, all of which suggests that Soldier Boy's explosive powers are nuclear. Now, while Homelander doesn't have any stated weaknesses and is damn near invincible, it is suggested in the comics that he can be killed by a nuclear explosion. In fact, to keep him in line, Vought threatened Homelander with a nuclear bomb. even attaching one to him so that he doesn't go rogue. With Butcher now teaming up with Soldier Boy, he could potentially use Soldier Boy's powers to kill Homelander once and for all. But seeing as this is the boys, we can imagine this won't go quite to plan, and there will be predictably some collateral damage. Speaking of Homelander in the comics, Anthony Starr's look and costume design do look, for the most part, pretty in keeping with the Homelander that we see on the page, although there are still some notable differences. However, we do see an even more comic book accurate Homelander, as when MM goes to pick up his daughter, we see an animated image of Homelander on a lunchbox. Speaking of this scene though, did anyone catch any Easter eggs with the paper that Todd was marking? I didn't catch any myself, but I do wonder why the camera stayed on that piece of paper for so long. And as I said earlier, in this business you have to assume that everything is an Easter egg. But that raises the question though, once everything is an Easter egg, doesn't that mean that nothing is an Easter egg? Food for thought. The repercussions of Kimiko's fight with Soldier Boy in episode 4 still play through in episode 5, with Kimiko still unable to use her powers, with both her super strength and ability to heal quickly stripped away. While this doesn't happen in the comics, Kimiko, or the female as she is known, does end up in the hospital and does have a similar arc to the show version of the character, although in a different way. In the comics, the female winds up in the hospital after she is left badly injured because of a fight with Stormfront. Huey stays with her while she is bedbound, and after innocently trying to take one of her chocolate limes, Kimiko ends up breaking his arm, because Kimiko doesn't share food. As we pointed out, these are similar story beats to what we have seen on the show, just all jumbled up, as Kimiko ends up breaking Huey's arm as a cover so that he has an excuse to call in sick with Newman. And she does, of course, end up in the hospital after a fight with Soldier Boy. Chocolate limes are also mentioned, with Nina bringing Kimiko some for when she gets better. Keeping on Kimiko in the hospital, she has a dream sequence where she imagines herself in a musical number where she can dance and sing, which gives me some Make 'em Laugh from Singing in the Rain vibes, as well as other classical musical numbers from the 50s and beyond. Just in case you were wondering though, the song that Kimiko is singing is I Got Rhythm from the 1943 movie Girl Crazy, which starred Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. Like Legend, Blue Hawk is a new character to the boys, but he is one that actually doesn't have a history in the comics. However, he could be a play of the character Groundhawk in the comics and in the animated spin-off series Diabolical, who was an unflattering parody of the character Wolverine. However, instead of adamantium claws that come out of his knuckles, he instead has the less practical powers of hammers for hands. While Blue Hawk's powers may not be related to Wolverine, the leather jacket he wears does look like the motorcycle jacket sported by Logan in the movies, while the helmet Blue Hawk wears is slightly similar to the helmet worn by another mutant, Magneto. Queen Maeve is definitely one of the most sympathetic characters on the show, at least when it comes to the soups anyways. And it's safe to say she's had a pretty rough go of it, especially when it comes to alcoholism and her gin habit. While Queen Maeve is an alcoholic in the comics and does have sympathy for Starlight, she doesn't have a physical relationship with Butcher like she does in the show. However, she does actually have a relationship with Stormfront, who's a man in the comics, and they end up having a soup child together, Blarney Cock, who was accidentally killed by Huey in the comics and was the original owner of Jamie the hamster. You know, the one that went on a beat-up killing spree. Sorry, I just wanted to think about that scene again. Early on in the episode, Huey vomits out the remaining Compound V from his system, which was hilariously described by Butcher as Kermit's thing that I won't repeat on YouTube. Anyway, as Butcher watches Huey vomit, he flashes to a younger character before reverting back to Huey. This is likely a reference to Butcher's younger brother Lenny, who unalived himself before the events of Season 1, something which Butcher still feels guilty and remorseful over. This also suggests that, despite being a hard bastard, Butcher sees Huey as a younger brother, and will likely not want to make the same mistakes that he did with Lenny. Episode 5 of The Boys had a hilarious cameo from none other than Seth Rogen, in a scene that totally gave me vibes of a particular scene from the movie Long Shot, which is again something that I won't say out loud on YouTube. What makes this cameo even more important though is Seth Rogen's history with the show, as alongside his longtime collaborator Evan Goldberg, he's an executive producer on the show, and it is likely that it would have never made it to the screen at all if it wasn't for his involvement with the project. As Huey justifies taking Compound V to Starlight, he says that he knows about the concerns of addiction as he's seen the movie Trainspotting. This is a pretty apt reference, as not only does the movie follow a group of addicts, in particular Ewan McGregor's Renton, who stumbles through bad ideas and sobriety attempts with his unreliable friends, but it's also set in Scotland, where the character Huey is from in the comics. Another, admittedly more obvious movie reference made by Huey is the one about Dom Toretto from Fast and the Furious. In particular, the joke about family, which is basically all over the internet.
Because I'm quick and I'm all about family.
Almond Joy has been a reoccurring gag in The Boys, not only being a common love between Huey and Starlight, but it's also Black Noir's main weakness. Well, along with fire, apparently. This show makes a callback to Almond Joy's in episode 5 as Huey offers Starlight a series of refreshments, including Almond Joy's, before he tells her that he's been juicing up on Compound V. Early on in the episode, as Homelander consolidates his power over Vought with a board meeting, one of the board members says that they were looking forward to working hand in glove with Homelander. This is a nice little joke to the fact that Homelander always wears gloves and seemingly never takes them off. It's a good thing he doesn't really sweat then. The boys poked fun at all the major tropes in comic book movies with their faux film Dawn of the Seven, but they are also admittedly guilty of pulling one themselves. As Butcher approaches the site where Soldier Boy exploded, he takes his sunglasses off in shock, a cliche that's been seen all over Hollywood since basically the beginning of time. And in this episode of What Mother's Milk is Wearing, to continue on with the trend of hip-hop tees that he wears, in episode 5 he is wearing a Stop the Violence shirt, which is a reference to Boogie Down Productions. And finally, the boys makes fun of product placement, like A-Train's drink Turbo Rush for example. But that doesn't mean the show is exempt from it themselves. In the scene where Huey tells Starlight he juiced up on Compound V, it plays out like a White Claw ad. I mean, he says it like 5 times. Although if the aim was to make me want to drink one, it did work to be fair. How's that for product placement?